Actually, I will let Shandar Hobbs begin, and we'll just continue to be admitting people as we can.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. So today we're going to talk about getting help when your child is struggling in school. So our agenda for our time together, we're going to talk about signs that students need additional support. We'll talk about what's considered MTSS, or the multi-tiered system of support, and what that looks like in our schools. And then we'll talk about Section 504 and special education. Alvin ISD is a dynamic learning organization committed to excellence for each student in every program, which is why we are here today. And we're so excited that as you've come along on this journey with us so that we can help support our students in any way possible. So we want to start with signs that a student needs additional support. And so you may see some of these things at home, and these are the things we want to be attuned to know that we need to provide students with additional support. So you may see becoming easily frustrated, maybe when they're working on homework or doing an assignment, and they're not normally frustrated like that. That would be a sign that they may be struggling with their academic work. You may see struggles with basic reading, writing, and math skills. So as, again, working on homework or just trying to complete simple tasks, and you see that they have times where reading seems really hard for them, and it looks like something that normally comes home, and they maybe normally wouldn't be struggling with that. Those are signs that we want to move forward with talking about your student. Maybe they get anxious about school or homework. Maybe they lack motivation to complete schoolwork or homework. They may have difficulty staying on task, doing chores around the house, staying on task, doing their homework, staying on task, completing something you've asked them to complete. And so that may be a sign that they need some additional support. Or just taking longer than normal to complete academic tasks. So an elementary student would spend 15 to 20 minutes on a homework assignment. If it's taking longer than that, then that would be considered abnormally long amount of time. And then that time just increases by just a little bit as they move up through junior high and high school. So if you're noticing that it's taking them a longer amount of time to complete tasks, this might be a sign that your student needs additional support. Of course, none of these are exact, and they all are signs that they may need additional support. So if they need additional support, where do we start? We always say start with the classroom teacher. And that is your first contact and the person who knows your student as a learner the best. And so why would you contact the classroom teacher? So they may be struggling with homework. Well, one way to support students with homework is to create a dedicated space in your home that might be free of distractions in order to help support them complete homework in a timely manner, and to do it the best that they can. Now, one of the ways to also help that is to set expectations. Maybe you set a timer for 15 minutes and they work on homework for 15 minutes, and then maybe they get up and walk around, take a walk outside, color a picture if they're a younger student. Maybe they have 5 minutes of device time. But by setting those expectations and allowing them a distraction-free space to work, and then knowing that a break is coming might help with homework struggles. We also want students to practice critical thinking skills. This could be something like working a jigsaw puzzle or playing a game, or as you're walking through the grocery store, hey, I've got $20 and how many boxes of cereal can I buy if the boxes of cereal are $5 a piece? That's critical thinking, using those skills in a real life situation. So those are great ways to help support your students. We also want kids to read nightly, and this should be choice reading, anything that they want to read, a magazine, the back of a cereal box, a book that they've already read that they just want to read over again. Because we know that the best way to increase our reading skills is to practice. And so we want kids to have the choice in what they read in that practice time. But of course, the best way to help support that is to then discuss it. Talk to you, talk to a neighbor, talk to a grandparent, talk to a sibling about what they've read. What do they like? What do they not like about it? Those help keep those critical thinking skills and the analysis of the text. That makes it important. That helps them with those reading skills. If you've got a dedicated workspace and you're reading every night, and your student is still struggling with homework and those tasks, absolutely contact the teacher about tutorials. Most of our campuses, our teachers have dedicated tutorial times. They have a morning time or an afternoon time, or the campus sometimes has a tutorial lab. And so students have that availability to attend those on a daily basis. And so you want to make sure that you know when those tutorial times are so that students can go and get that extra help immediately when they are struggling. Also, for our elementary students, we have our Imagine Learning bank of resources that are there. And if you have any questions about that, you can also check our website or check with the classroom teacher on what's appropriate for students to be doing in Imagine Learning. And then all of their assignments, the majority of their assignments are posted in Google Classroom. So always ask your student to log into Google Classroom, and you can look at their assignments and the syllabus and things that are coming from the teacher. So that also helps you understand what's coming up. You'll know when a test is coming up or a quiz or a big project. That information will be posted in Google Classroom to help support you. If your student is struggling beyond just homework and needs some additional support, the way that we support that in Alvin ISD is through an MTSS or a multi-tiered system of support. You might have formerly heard this referred to as RTI, or response to intervention, but the name has changed to MTSS, multi-tiered system of support. And what this is it's preventative support for your student. It's framework based, it's research based, and it truly is about looking at the whole child, their academics, their behavior, and their social and emotional needs. And anywhere that a student is showing a gap in their learning and that they need some additional support, we support them through an MTSS. And what that just means is that we make informed decisions based on data that's collected in our schools to provide an appropriate intervention for your student. We want to make sure that wherever the data shows us that a student is struggling, that the intervention we provide for them matches that. And the purpose, again, is preventative. We are trying to prevent long-term difficulties by meeting the needs of our students quickly and routinely. So how do we do this? We start with data collection. Throughout the school year, we have multiple points of data that's collected at all grade levels. And this data gives us the information that we need so we can intervene quickly and early with our students. So this may be something like a unit test or a project. So you would see those grades in Skyward. Curriculum-based assessments, or CBAs, we give them a couple times during the year. And again, it's a benchmark for us to see how students are progressing. Our secondary students have semester exams. Our elementary and primary students in lower grades take what's called the Texas KIA. It's a kindergarten assessment. Our first and second graders take TPRI, or Tejas Ley. We do monitor reading levels all through elementary. Our elementary students do take NWEA MAP. So out of these things, you may see some parent notifications that come home to tell you how your student is progressing. So you'll have some information on how they're doing, plus we have the information in the schools, and then behavior contracts as well. These are just some of the ways that we collect data on our students that a lot of times give us, there's either a number or a grade level that corresponds to that. But our teachers also collect formative assessment, and that just means it's the daily things that are happening in the classroom, what they're noticing about their students. They may be taking notes on that. They may be using a checklist to monitor their progress. But through all of this data, that determines how we best meet the needs of your students. So what that looks like is, based on our data, our campuses come together with grade level teachers and with a team on campus. They're instructional coaches for reading and math, they're counselors, they're intervention teachers, the experts in these areas come together to talk to teachers, and they look at the data and they determine what students need. And through that determination, we get very targeted on how to meet the needs of students. We really break down the standard into the lowest skill possible in order to be able to build on those skills and what students need. And then based on what they need, we provide appropriate interventions. And so when we say appropriate interventions, we mean research-based instructional practices that are focused and targeted on the very needs of those students. And this happens during campus intervention time. So each of our campuses have a little bit of time built into their schedule so that students come together, they're grouped based on those needs. And like I mentioned before, those instructional practices that are research-based and targeted are what they're working on during that time. At no time are they're not missing out on any new instruction. This time is meant for intervention for students who need it. It's also a time for a student who doesn't need intervention to receive some enrichment services. So it's truly a time of what we call differentiated instruction, where we really look at the data and we break it up and give students exactly what they need in order to be successful. So those interventions occur for most campuses every 4 weeks. They look at the data. At a minimum, data is looked at every 8 weeks for students. And then decisions are made. If what we're doing is working, we continue to do those interventions. If what we're doing has worked so well that the student no longer needs those interventions, then we reduce those supports. The flip side of that is also true. If students aren't making adequate progress in those 4 weeks and they need additional support, we either increase their interventions, increase their support time, or increase the number of sessions or allotted time that they have in order for them to be successful.
Chandar, there's a question related to what you're saying right now. Somebody wants to know, who do they have to contact at the school for the MTSS because their daughter meets everything that you have described? So who will be the person at school to contact?
You definitely want to start with the classroom teacher and share your concerns with the classroom teacher, because the classroom teacher is the one who says and tells our campuses the student is struggling and needs some additional support. So they're the ones who refer your students to, it's what we call a PST team or a problem solving team. Every campus has one. So if you'll contact your classroom teacher and tell them that your student is in need of MTSS supports, that classroom teacher will bring that student up to the to the problem solving team. Excellent. Okay, so The big benefits of MTSS is that it is early intervention. We want to look at the data, and thankfully, Alvin ISD does a great job of collecting data on students. So as soon as we look at that data, we determine students who have a need, and then we immediately start grouping those students based on that need and giving them focused attention. The decisions are based on a plethora of things: how they perform in the classroom, how they performed on these assessments, how they behaviors just walking down the hallway, how they work in a small group, how they work on one-on-one. There's lots of things that come into play in order to determine the best needs of those students. But it truly is a preventative process because we're trying to keep kids from needing 504 special education services. However, if they continue to not be successful, we do have steps in place where we can provide them additional support. The one thing I do want to mention about MTSS is that if your students have been referred for MTSS and they are in need of MTSS services, you will receive a letter from your campus letting you know that your student is receiving those additional support services. And if you have any questions about that, it tells you who to contact. Normally it's the classroom teacher to be able to answer your questions, exactly what's happening, how many times they're happening, all of that information. So if students are unsuccessful in MTSS, like I said before, we do make a referral for special education or 504. However, even though as a classroom teacher or as a campus we're doing this, it never takes away your right as a parent to request that evaluation.
All right. And I do want to emphasize that because, MTSS provides it's a valuable tool for our campuses to be able to work with students early on in the process. There are several different ways that a referral for a 504 evaluation or a special education evaluation can happen. One of those is a referral by a parent. There are times when parents, you may have received information from your physician or from other sources, or you may have significant concerns about your child. You as a parent have a right to request an evaluation for 504 special education at any time. MTSS is our other kind of pathway to a 504 or a special education evaluation. If we're looking at our progress monitoring through MTSS and we determine there might be some needs that are above and beyond what is currently being provided in the intervention plan, we've tried additional interventions, we've increased the amount of services and supports, then that 504 special education evaluation can provide some additional information to bring to the table. So I'll start talking about Section 504. Section 504 is considered a part of general education programming, and it's based on a law from 1973 that was passed as an anti-discrimination law. It's really about providing access to individuals who have disabilities. And so how that applies in the school is that it really ensures that students who are eligible that have a disability are able to have access to the educational benefits and opportunities that any other student within Alvin ISD would have. So to determine whether a student would be eligible for an intervention plan or what's called an IAP under Section 504, The student has to have a physical or mental impairment that limits one or more major life activities. And within the school, typically the life activity that is impacted is learning. Sometimes we have students that the major life activity is related to mobility or, some of the health issues, but a lot of times it's related to learning. We have a record of such impairment or regarded as having an impairment. So an evaluation for 504, it could look different based on, the information that we have about a student. So if that impairment is related to a medical condition, then that evaluation might be gathering information from the student's physician to get their recommendations. If it is related to some concerns about learning or a condition such as ADHD, it might be a combination, getting information from parents, getting information from teachers, just gathering up some of that history. So once that evaluation is completed, then the 504 committee will meet to review information and to decide what are the appropriate supports for the student. We might be continuing, recommending that we continue those interventions that were provided through MTSS and maybe building in some additional accommodations to support that access. In fact, a lot of times for our 504 students, that would be, some of the intervention that would happen. Some of our students receiving 504 supports, they might be receiving intervention, for example, from a dyslexia specialist, or they might receive some supports to help them physically access the campus. And so when you get into Section 504, it is, again, very individualized and based on what the student's needs are. And then we've included kind of a little a hot link to a 504 fact sheet that just kind of breaks down with a little more detail some of what we've discussed today of what a 504 committee, who's on that committee, how, kind of what is involved with that process. Typically, a student who's receiving 504, their progress is monitored kind of through the means that you see with our 9 weeks progress reports, some of the tools that are available that Ms. Hobbs shared for all students. And then there's typically an annual meeting where we review the plan and make any adjustments that are necessary to the plan. If something changes for a student who's receiving 504 supports and we need to adjust their IAP, or we are seeing that there might be more intense needs or more individualized needs, then that might be where the 504 committee might make a referral for an evaluation for special education. So special education is governed by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and they kind of determine who would be, that law guides us on who would be eligible for receiving special education services. And so really there's two things that we consider when we're trying to decide if a student needs to take that next step to receive special education services. The first one is, does the student have a disability? And then does that student need instruction that is specially designed to meet their unique needs based on that disability? So it's kind of taking it to the next step as far as the level of support that is provided to the student. So to get the process started for considering special education support, we start with a full and individual initial evaluation. And this is a little more in-depth than the evaluations that we would see for students receiving supports under Section 504. Like I mentioned earlier, the parent or school personnel may initiate that request for an initial evaluation. Before we would get the process started, we would have to have parent consent before we could begin. Because like I said, this is a pretty in-depth evaluation looking at lots of different areas. So considering things like speech and language development, or considering, how a student is doing emotionally and behaviorally, kind of their academic skills and their performance, if, how they're processing information. And so we want to make sure parents understand kind of what that process looks like, the different areas that we'll be considering in the evaluation before we get started with that. When there is an evaluation, unlike MTSS, there is a little bit of a gap between when we start the process and when an evaluation is completed, just because we're gathering new information that can be pretty in-depth. And so the time frame that an evaluation must be completed in is no more than 45 school days following parent consent. And so that allows us time to gather the information. It allows our evaluators to interpret that information and follow up on anything that we need to follow up on. And then there is an evaluation report that will summarize the information. And again, the purpose of that is to determine if a student meets criteria for one of the disability conditions listed in IDEA, and then to help us determine what is the impact. If the student does have a disability condition, how is that impacting their education? Because once we know what the impact of that is, then we come together as what's called an admission review and dismissal committee and review that information. We review the results and talk about what are those impacts and design a plan of instruction that will help address those areas of impact. And again, this is very individualized because a student's disability could impact their behavior. And so the plan might be, geared towards what are the skills that we need to address in the area of behavior. It could be focused on reading or math or another academic area. And so the evaluation provides that information to give a good baseline of what is it that the student needs, what do we need to specially design and put in place to address those negative impacts that a student is experiencing on their progress. And once we come up with that plan, that is their IEP that we put in place and we implement for a student. For students receiving special education, that progress monitoring is a little more in depth than it would be for MTSS and for 504. There's a little more structure to it. And sometimes even as a part of the IEP, there's some specific guidelines for the progress monitoring. But the IEP, we're really looking at, progress on the IEP. We're looking for progress in those areas that we've identified are having the biggest impact for a student. This information about progress will be shared with parents at least as often as you receive a report card. There's sometimes that we provide that information more frequently through their special education case managers. And then the ARD committee meets at least once a year to look at, is our plan working? Do we need to be making adjustments? If there's something that leads us to believe we need to make adjustments earlier than a year, then we can come together as a team in advance of that and make any adjustments. And then our students receiving special education, they have another evaluation at least every 3 years because we know that children change and the impacts might be changing. If a student is doing well, it could be that their disability condition is no longer requiring specially designed instruction, and we might need to refer for a 504 plan. Or we may need to, further implement some additional interventions. If a student is still struggling and still having a difficult time, we may need to add more to that plan to address that impact on their education. So this is a lot of information, but it kind of gives you that pathway from when we're first starting to see a student is having difficulty and some of the things that teachers begin to implement. And then as we go through our MTSS, our systems of support, through our PST process, students who are needing some additional support that may receive that through Section 504 when they have an identified disability. And then our students who are needing that specially designed instruction due to their disability condition. So it's kind of the full range of supports that are available to our students who might be experiencing difficulties in school and are needing that additional support. So there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of information, I'm sorry. We want to make sure that you have time for questions. We did want to include just some areas where you have some more information. So again, like Ms. Hobbs shared, your child's teacher is a good first step for if I'm needing some more information about how I can support my child, about kind of what my child's needs are. Your teacher has that day-to-day knowledge, and the teacher also has that benefit of seeing your child kind of and how your child is doing in comparison with other students. So as a parent, I might be really concerned about an area because it's different than what I would expect. And then I speak with my child's teacher, and my child's teacher can say, well, no, we're still working on this. And we're building this up just as a part of our day-to-day classroom. And it's a part of the 3rd grade curriculum, or it's a part of the 6th grade curriculum. Your child's campus counselor is a good resource to kind of guide you through if you have questions about, okay, I have these concerns, what would be my next steps? I included the link to our website, and in several different places, there is additional information about the varying levels of support that we talked about today, and what that looks like within Alvin ISD. And then I included a link to the Texas Education Agency website. There are a lot of valuable resources available for parents on how to navigate some of, the different processes for MTSS or Section 504 or special education, so that, you are comfortable kind of feeling like, okay, I know based on my experiences with my child, this is the direction that I feel like we're heading, and you feel like you're a part of the team. Because I think in general, starting from MTSS all the way through to students who are needing that more individualized special education support, like we want parents to be a part of that team with the school to meet the needs of their students.
So there's a question in one of the chat that somebody was saying that she was informed by the teachers at her child's school that tutorials do not begin until next semester. Is there another option for tutorials, or?
So for elementary, we know by just living through it and what the research actually says that after school tutorials isn't the best way to help students. And so that's why we have that built-in intervention time during the school day to really meet their needs. So my question would not be necessarily, is there an after school tutorial? The question more would be, is your child part of that built-in intervention time during the school day to meet their direct needs?
Okay, so I guess these parents have to go and ask the teacher if the child is part of that intervention. Okay, and there's a parent that would like to know if besides all the resources that we are providing for the special education, where can they find resources for the special classes, even if their child is at APA?
And we would definitely want them to start with the classroom teacher. The classroom teacher is going to be the best wealth of knowledge, because the teacher knows the standards and they know what would be best for that student to do in order to be prepared to be successful in that classroom.
And the microphones are open at this time. So if anybody has an additional question for Ms. Chauvin or Ms. Hobbs, please, you can ask those questions.
Hi, this is Marcus Barnes. I had a question. My two children are at Rodeo Palms, and they transferred from Cypher ISD last year. They were staying with their mom, and she moved. So I kind of had short notice coming to the district. But the question I had was, my son took Spanish 1. I'm not sure this is related to this training or not, but I hope it is. They weren't required to submit transcripts prior to enrolling into the school. And now he's taking Spanish 1 again. And he could have had a high school credit and took Spanish 2. And when I submit the transcripts, they said that the deadline was September 10th. Are there any resources or ways to get around that for the benefit of the child? It doesn't make sense that he is repeating a class. And I didn't know about this because, again, he's staying with his mom and fighting for a custody situation. But I've always been the parent that's been more on top of things. I live in Cypress, so it's an hour away to Alvin when I come to visit the school. But I just assumed that he would have to submit transcripts from the previous school. So is there a policy on that as far as evaluating what classes kids get into and not?
I would encourage you to reach out to your child's counselor, because they're going to have the most up-to-date information on what the prerequisites are for specific classes. And then they'll know kind of those deadlines, and if anything, be able to give you the information about the deadlines, because it could be that deadline is related to kind of the high school credit piece of it. But I don't want to step in and give you incorrect information.
Well, that's what I did. That's where I got the information from. He wasn't aware of the situation, and he was kind of shocked because they only registered 4 days before school started. And so the issue is, you have a co-parenting situation. I guess the assumption is that both parents communicate and work together effectively, and that's not always the case. And so I didn't know a lot of information. I didn't know my kids were registered and put in classes that they had already taken the year before. And I assumed that it was just normal protocol to pull transcripts from the previous district to the current district to do an evaluation or an audit before they were put in classes. I wasn't blaming him. I was just saying, golly, I didn't know there was a deadline. I didn't know this happened. And now my kid's at a disservice where he could have gotten all his credits done. So when he goes to high school next year, he doesn't have any foreign language needed to be taken. That's a whole.
Is your child in 8th grade at this time?
Yes.
So he took a Spanish 1 in 7th grade. So he should be taking a Spanish 2 right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I took it on my own to submit, to get his report card and transcripts and communicate with the former counselor once I found out. So he has everything qualified to go in Spanish too, but it's just that it happened like on the 16th of September instead of the 10th.
I think that Ms. Hobbs recommended, I would reach out again to the counselor and maybe set up a meeting with the counselor and even the registrar, because to find out when those transcripts were received into Alvin ISD, because I think that I had a similar situation with my son. It was the opposite, was coming from Alvin ISD to Fort Bend ISD, and exactly the same happened. The transcript didn't get to them on time, so he was having to repeat some Spanish 1 and Spanish 2, and he had already taken a credit by examination. So it was, they got together, they got the transcript, and we were able to work it out. So I'm not sure if that's going to happen due to the time they have gone, since we started school, but it will be worth it for you guys to set up a meeting and kind of see if there is a way to transfer him into the Spanish 2 class. Because if the transcript is there, maybe that can be done, but definitely as soon as possible, set up that meeting with the school counselor, and if possible to have the register in the meeting, so that way you can have all that information that they have on file.
Yeah, well, we had the meeting last week, so we did miss the deadline. So the only thing is, I'm just questioning as far as policy being in place. Is that something that Alvin can look at, like for going forward? Like, you don't just want to give a questionnaire.
Yeah.
It sounds crazy. You would think most moms would. I'm not trying to attack the mom, but you would just think that what your kid took last year. You should have to submit a report card, or you should have to submit a transcript, something showing what they had. And I just don't know how that slipped through the cracks like that, because that's
we'll look into these, and I have you email, so we'll look into these further, and then we'll email you if there's something else that we can do. Maybe we will email you. Okay.
Yeah, even the summer class, if he has an opportunity to take that over the summer, I just don't want him having to do that in high school when he can be doing other STEM classes or Latin and Greek or something else that's going to benefit him.
Absolutely. We'll get back to you. We'll find out and we'll get back to you.
Thank you so much.
I see a question in the chat about a student who has an IEP but is still struggling in the area of math. And so kind of what would be the next steps with this, or how would you go about kind of looking at some of the options for modified curriculum? I would say the next step would be to kind of get with your student's special education case manager and determine if we need to do some additional accommodations that we can add. There are some things that we can add with what's called an amendment to the plan, where if we are just like, yes, we'll work with the teacher. I feel like if we add this accommodation and this accommodation, if we build this support into the current class, we might be able to improve our progress. If we feel like, no, we're multiple grade levels behind where we should be, then we do have a continuum of services where we could build in some additional supports, whether it's what's called inclusion support at the elementary, where we have somebody go into the classroom, or, if we need to do modified curriculum in what's called resource. And so that would be requesting an ARD committee meeting and having the ARD committee review the information we have and determine if that is what the student needs in order to make progress. So get with your student's special education case manager and kind of speak with them about, these are my concerns, and you can always request an ARD meeting to have the ARD committee come together and look at that. We have a couple of questions about behavior supports within the school setting, and then looking at some of those avoidant behaviors. And we do have some options within MTSS 504 and special education related to behavioral needs. So at the elementary level, our campuses have a dedicated person assigned to each campus. Some of our campuses, it's called an elementary behavior specialist that is there to support teachers and support students who might be struggling in that emotional behavioral area, to develop some of these individualized plans. At some of our other campuses, that is with what's called our PASS teacher. PASS is a special education program designed to address behavior. But they also at the elementary level work in the same type of role as an elementary behavior specialist to provide some of those supports for all students. We also have our school counselors that provide some SEL curriculum support, provide that information. And then at the secondary level, we have our SEL counselors that are available as a resource to help support campuses.
And Sarah, on October 11, we are going to be offering a workshop. Rogelio Maxwell, one of our behavior specialists, will be presenting on behavior, and he does an awesome job with, letting you know a lot of resources and ways to work with your child behavior. He addresses behavior from elementary school all the way to secondary school. So please be in the lookout. We're going to be sending out that invitation next week, but the date is going to be October 11, and it's the same platform that we're using today. It's going to be virtual, the same time, 11:30 to 12:30. Please register because he does a really, really good job with behavior. So, yeah.
And then there was a question about outside support for students who might be struggling coping with emotions and behavior. I would encourage you to reach out to your child's campus counselor. They have access to some resource lists of community resources that might be available to help support families. If your child is receiving support within the community, they can also get your permission to kind of collaborate and kind of have that, get information from your child's outside provider, be able to share information about what they're observing in school to make sure kind of, again, it's that wraparound working with the whole child, make sure everybody is on the same page and that there's some consistency with that planning. And so your campus counselor, if you look at the Alvin ISD website, there are some resources there, including our monthly web newsletter with Kids in Mind that can provide some information about resources. And then I see the question about requesting assistance from the elementary behavior specialists, if that would be the teacher or if that would be the parent. I would encourage parents, if you're thinking your child is needing that level of support, to start with the classroom teacher and, hey, is there anything available on your campus that could support this and provide some of that intervention. If the teacher is not sure, or if the teacher indicates that, yeah, I've had the specialist come to my classroom, give me some ideas, then I would reach out to your campus counselor about what would be some of the next steps to address, support in that area. So there's question about testing available for specific conditions like auditory processing disorder. And within the school, for a 504 evaluation, that request for information is a little more general. So like a lot of times students who may have that type of diagnosis, they may have information from a physician or an outside provider that has made that diagnosis, and that is the basis for a 504 plan. For special education assessment, our evaluations are focused on the disability categories that are listed in IDEA. And so we're looking for things like a speech impairment, learning disability, emotional disturbance, other health impairment. So that is kind of the lens that we're looking at. So we don't make a specific diagnosis, a medical diagnosis like auditory processing disorder. We're really focused on that educational diagnosis and if a student has characteristics of the educational diagnosis and what is the impact of that. So if a student has been diagnosed with an auditory processing disorder, that is a part of the information that's gathered as we're trying to determine, do they meet eligibility for this educational diagnosis? So I equate it as a puzzle that we're putting together the pieces to try to determine, what a student needs. And that would be a part of the puzzle. And then you have a question about the best way to ensure teachers are following a 504 plan. I keep referring back to our counselors, but if you have concerns about whether a student's 504 plan has been implemented, I would ask the teacher for some information about, what are some of those 504 plan accommodations that have been provided to their student. A lot of times teachers, they can then show you some of the work samples with the accommodations, or, they can let you know, we can kind of identify up front, is there a misunderstanding, or do we need to schedule another 504 meeting to make revisions to that? If you have concerns that a teacher isn't following the 504 plan, I would encourage you to reach out to either their campus counselor or your student's assistant principal or principal and share those concerns, because then they can, make sure that the teacher understands what those accommodations are and that they are able to show how they're implementing that.
All right. Well, I think that completes this workshop. Again, I'm going to be sharing these with you guys so that way you can have it, you can refer back to. And I believe you all have my email. If you have further questions, please send them to me and I will send it to the right person, either to Ms. Chauvin or Ms. Hub, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. But
absolutely. And we thank you guys for taking your time to come to today. You're being an active participant and a partner with the schools. Like that is, a great way to help your child do the very best that they can in school. So we definitely appreciate you taking your time and attending today.
All right. Well, have a good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Ms. Chauvin and Ms. Hobbs, for presenting today. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
See, let me stop recording these.